This world could be considered a land of dreams and fantasy, but that's just on the surface. Wherever there is light, there is always darkness. Evie, you're sure you know where you're going? How many times do I have to tell you? We have no real destination, so stop complaining. Fine. A man and a woman walked through the ruins of what used to be a small village. The man was just under 6 feet tall, with black hair. His right eye was red, his left a light powder blue. The woman was slightly shorter, with vibrant red hair that caught the light whenever she moved. Her right eye was a bright emerald green, her left a soft light purple, striking and unusual, like a living painting. As they passed the remains of the destroyed marketplace, Jing looked around, muttering, "Who could live out here in these ruins?" "Is that concern I hear in your voice, Jing?" Evie teased, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Besides, it can't hurt to check, right?" She was interrupted by a sudden bump against her leg. "What was that?" she exclaimed, instinctively steadying herself. Jing's eyes narrowed, tracking the small object that darted past them. "Don't know. Whatever it is, it's heading to the outskirts." "Let's follow it," Evie said, already moving. She was quick but deliberate, her practical boots making little sound against the cracked stones. Jing followed, keeping his distance but staying close enough to intervene if necessary. "Jing, we want to follow it back to wherever it calls home. Keep your distance." "Understood," Jing replied shortly. They trailed the figure to an abandoned house sitting at the very edge of town. Evie's eyes gleamed with quiet determination as she watched the shape slip inside. "All right, Jing. Time to meet our rude little friend." As they approached the crumbling house, faint voices floated through the air. "Ha ha, a nice haul today." "Sora, you have to stop doing things like that." "Well, we have to survive somehow." "But what if that person starves because of you?" "Not my fault if they can't protect what's theirs." Evie's expression hardened at the words. "Little thief," she murmured. "Let's go. Jing, take the back. I'll go through the front." Evie moved smoothly to where a door once stood, her steps silent and sure. "I'll be taking my money back," she said evenly, stepping into the threshold. A young boy spun to face her, hastily throwing himself into a defensive stance, clearly prepared to protect the others. "Run for it! I'll hold her off!" he yelled. The 3 other children bolted toward the back, only to be stopped almost immediately by a startled scream. A small girl raced back into the room, tears spilling down her face. "Sora, Sis, and Val got caught," she sobbed. "What?" Sora turned, eyes wide. Jing entered calmly, carrying a struggling young girl over his shoulder and a boy tucked under his opposite arm, both wriggling uselessly. "Viri, Val!" Sora cried. He turned to glare at Jing, fists balled. "Let them go, you bastard!" Jing's response was cold and indifferent. "Can we just leave them? They're a liability." "Jing!" Evie barked sharply, her voice carrying the weight of command. "You will not harm them. Put them down. Now." Jing exhaled heavily, but obeyed, setting the children back onto the ground. They scrambled to Sora's side without hesitation. Evie crouched to their level, offering a warm but firm smile. "Sora, right? You care about them a lot, don't you?" "Yeah," Sora said guardedly, never taking his eyes off Jing. "We're all we've got." Evie's smile softened. "You don't have to worry. Jing looks scary, but he's not going to hurt you." She shot Jing a knowing look. "Not while I'm here." Slowly, the room's tension began to ebb. Evie kept her voice gentle but clear. "How would you like to come with us? We have a real home, a safe one, food, shelter, and people who'll look out for you." Sora looked hesitant, glancing at Jing again. "Is your psycho boyfriend staying there too?" he asked nervously. Evie burst out laughing, a real, bright sound that filled the room. "He's not my boyfriend, just a stubborn friend," she said, her voice full of warmth. "If you stay with us, I promise he won't hurt you." Jing crossed his arms, looking skeptical but remaining silent. "Evie, are you sure about this?" he asked after a moment. She straightened, meeting his gaze firmly. "Look at them, Jing. They're surviving here alone. They're brave, but they shouldn't have to live like this." Her expression softened further. And besides, they're adorable. But Jing started. No, they're coming with us. They're mine now, Evie declared, her tone brooking no argument. Jing simply sighed, resigned. He knew when to pick his battles, and this wasn't one he could win. Evie turned back to the children. So, what are your names? The kids exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the youngest girl stepped forward. I'm Kaori, she said shyly. Kaori, the older girl scolded. You can't just tell strangers your name. But sis, she's nice, Kaori protested. She might be, Sora muttered, but he's a psychopath. He jerked a thumb toward Jing. Evie chuckled. Jing, show them something. Without a word, Jing knelt down and placed a hand to the ground. A small orb of light formed, expanding and reshaping until it took on the form of a tiny red panda. The creature blinked, tilted its head, then scampered onto Sora's head, perching there contentedly. The children stared, wide-eyed. If you come with us, Evie said, you can keep it. Sora hesitated, still suspicious, but the sight of the magical creature softened him. I'm Sora, he said at last. The quiet boy beside him spoke next, his voice quiet but steady. Valel. The older girl crossed her arms, scowling, but finally gave in with an exaggerated huff. Fine, Viridia, she said. Evie beamed, pulling the four of them into a tight, protective hug. You're safe now, she whispered. Jing simply sighed, watching the scene unfold. Guess we're heading home then, he said dryly. Yes, Evie cheered, still clinging to her new family like she was never letting go. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting soft beams of light through the kitchen window. The aroma of sizzling breakfast filled the house as Jing stood at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes, his hands moving with practiced ease. Though his silence was often a mark of his serious demeanor, today he was completely focused on the task at hand, making sure the kids had something hearty to start their day. Evie was already in the middle of getting ready, her red hair neatly braided as she grabbed her coat from the back of a chair. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes gentle as she spoke to Jing. I'll be heading out soon, Evie said, her voice warm but laced with the quiet determination of someone with a busy day ahead. Jing only nodded in response, the clattering of the pans the only sound as he finished up the last of the pancakes. He could hear footsteps approaching from the hallway. Kids, Jing called, his voice low but firm. Breakfast is ready. The first to appear in the kitchen was Valel, dressed in his school uniform, a standard navy blazer, white button-up shirt, and matching slacks. His expression was unreadable as he walked past, taking a seat at the kitchen table without a word. His tousled dark hair fell into his eyes as he looked down at the plate of pancakes Jing set in front of him. He didn't need to say much. It was clear he had a reserved nature, preferring to keep to himself rather than chatter about the morning. Next came Kaori, her soft brown hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, her school uniform fitting her petite frame. Her eyes, two different hues of purple, sparkled with energy as she bounded into the room, a wide smile lighting up her face. Good morning, Jing. Thanks for breakfast, Kaori greeted, her voice sweet and cheerful as she took a seat beside Valel. The warm, sunny personality that contrasted with the quiet, serious nature of her brother made her presence feel like a breath of fresh air in the room. Viridia followed closely behind Kaori, her strawberry blonde hair tied in a loose ponytail. She was dressed similarly, her school uniform sharp and neat, though her posture was much more relaxed than the others, a slight, tomboyish edge to her appearance. Despite her small, slender frame, there was a quiet intensity about her, especially when it came to her training. Viridia shot a glance at the other two kids before taking her seat, looking like she was still half lost in thought. She didn't need to speak much. Her fiery personality was well known by now, and her eyes always seemed to be scanning the room, calculating and sharp. The three siblings sat down, exchanging quiet greetings before diving into the meal laid before them. Jing didn't speak much. He was used to the noise of the morning routine by now. But something in the air felt different. Maybe it was the way they'd all grown since that fateful day they first met. As the last of the pancakes were being devoured, Jing glanced at the clock on the wall and raised an eyebrow. "So, where's Sora?" he asked, his voice as blunt as ever. Valel was the first to respond, his tone dry but somehow still serious. "He's still sleeping." Jing just sighed quietly, shaking his head. Typical. Jing sighed softly and briefly closed his eyes. His gaze lingered on the stairs, and for a moment, a faint glow emanated from his eyes. The faint pulse of energy was enough to signal that he'd nudged Sora into consciousness. Moments later, a loud, disgruntled yell echoed from upstairs. "I'm up! I'm up!" Sora's voice, half groggy and half annoyed, echoed through the house. There was the unmistakable sound of a struggle, followed by a crash. Sora's muffled complaints drifted down from above. The clatter of footsteps grew louder, followed by an awkward shuffle as Sora made his way down the stairs, still half asleep. He appeared at the top of the stairs, looking like a mess, half-dressed, with his shirt half tucked in and his tie hanging crookedly around his neck. His hair was a mess, sticking up in random directions, and his eyes, usually bright and full of energy, were barely open. Still, the red around the outer parts of his blue eyes gave him away as someone who'd just barely escaped the comfort of his bed. "I'm getting there, I'm getting there," Sora grumbled, rubbing his face. He moved down the stairs like a zombie, trying to make himself presentable but failing miserably. Sora reached the bottom of the stairs, stumbling slightly before straightening up, offering a lazy grin as he slouched toward the table. "Morning, or, well, whatever it is right now," he muttered, still shaking off the remnants of sleep. Evie, already dressed and ready to leave, leaned against the doorframe with a knowing smile. "You know, you really should start waking up earlier if you're going to keep up with everyone else." Sora shot her a tired look, brushing his messy hair back. "Didn't mean to sleep in, just kind of overslept," he muttered, shrugging it off. "You know how it goes." Jing, who had been quietly tending to breakfast, didn't say a word, but the faint glow in his eyes was enough to indicate that his use of energy had nudged Sora awake. The glow faded as quickly as it had appeared. Sora glanced at Jing, who remained silent as usual, and then flashed an apologetic smile. "Guess I owe you for that." Evie chuckled, crossing her arms. "I swear you and that alarm clock have a love-hate relationship." Sora didn't even try to defend himself this time. "What can I say? It's a gift," he said, grinning sheepishly as he flopped into his seat at the table, already reaching for the food. "Thanks for breakfast, Jing." Evie shook her head with a grin before looking Sora over one more time. "Are you sure you're ready for school, dressed like that?" Sora shrugged as he dug into his food, completely unfazed. "Hey, I'll survive. I'm still waking up." As the group settled into their morning routine, Evie glanced at the clock and straightened up, grabbing her bag from the counter. "Well, I'd love to stick around, but someone's got to bring home the bacon," she said with a wink, giving them all a warm smile. "Take care of yourselves, all right?" She walked briskly toward the door, calling over her shoulder, "Goodbye, everyone. Don't make too much of a mess." Jing gave her a silent nod, the faintest smile tugging at his lips as he continued with his quiet, focused work. As Evie opened the door, she paused just before stepping out, turning back to look at her children with a playful glint in her mismatched eyes. "Oh, and Kaori," she said with a teasing smile, "make sure your lazy older brother gets his act together, will you?" Kaori, who had been sitting quietly at the table, looked up and grinned. "Sure thing, Mom," she replied with a soft laugh, standing up from her chair and making her way over to where Sora sat slouched. "You heard her," Kaori added, giving her brother a playful nudge in the side. "Get moving, you've got a reputation to uphold." Sora groaned dramatically, clearly not looking forward to the task at hand. "I don't need this pressure first thing in the morning," he mumbled, though he still allowed Kaori to start adjusting his disheveled uniform with practiced precision. As Kaori fixed her older brother's tie, Sora shot a side-eye at Valel, who was sitting across from him, quietly eating his breakfast. "Why didn't you wake me up, Val?" Sora asked, his voice filled with a mix of annoyance and confusion. Valel, ever the calm one, looked over at him, his face impassive. "I tried, but you wouldn't move," he said simply, not even bothering to look up from his plate as he finished his meal with a quiet grace. Sora rolled his eyes, slouching further into his seat. "Figures, you're useless in the mornings," he muttered, though there was no real malice behind his words. Kaori shot him a teasing glance. "If you're going to complain, you might as well just get up and do it yourself," she said, finishing with his tie and stepping back to admire her work. "There. Not bad for a lazy older brother." Sora sighed, finally sitting up and looking more like a teenager about to face a day of school. Slightly presentable, but still not fully awake. All right, I'm ready. You can stop fussing over me now." The morning sun cast a golden hue over the trees as Jing stood at the front of the house, arms crossed, silently watching the 4 teenagers make their way down the path toward the city. Their school uniforms were neat. Well, mostly. Valel walked ahead, calm and composed as always. Kaori, ever the caretaker, fussed over Viridia's slightly off-center ponytail while talking animatedly. Viridia swatted her hand away with a half-hearted glare but didn't protest. Sora trailed behind them, yawning, his shirt only halfway tucked in. Once the gate closed behind them and their voices faded into the distance, Jing turned away and walked back inside. The house was quiet again, the usual hum of the morning routines now absent. He paused for a moment, feeling the familiar ache of emptiness settle in his chest. It wasn't as sharp as it used to be, but the silence still tugged at him. It had been a decade since the kids had come into his life, and although he'd grown used to their presence, some mornings still carried that initial weight of change. In the days following the children's arrival, life had shifted in ways Jing never could have predicted. He hadn't changed much of his routine, still rising with the sun, still moving through his daily training exercises in the clearing out back, but the silence he'd grown used to was gone. The first week had been an overwhelming blur. Jing would train in the yard, focused and precise, only to hear a crash from the kitchen or sudden laughter echo through the house. He'd take breaks from his routine, not for rest, but to cook meals, to check on the kids, to escort one of them nervously to the bathroom during a thunderstorm, or to clean up whatever disaster had just unfolded. There were adjustments. Sora tried to act like nothing bothered him but kept sneaking off to sulk when no one was looking. Kaori insisted on helping with everything, from folding laundry to organizing the pantry, even if she was too small back then to reach half the shelves. Viridia watched Jing's every movement during his training, mimicking his stances when she thought no one was watching. Valel barely said a word, but somehow always ended up sitting nearby, quietly observing or offering to help if someone else was struggling. And through all of it, Evie had been there. She seemed to know just when to step in, guiding the kids, offering her quiet wisdom, and helping with the growing chaos. It was her idea to take on a steady job, leveraging her reputation and expertise in healing magic. Organizations competed for her, but she chose one close enough that she could return home each day. It made sense. Jing wasn't suited for structured employment, and Evie, despite the chaos in the house, seemed to thrive with purpose and routine. She left early most mornings, giving gentle hugs and parting words to the kids, always with that calm, reassuring presence. She never shared the details of her work, and Jing never asked. They each had their own ways of contributing, making the house feel like home despite the mess and noise. Kaori, in particular, had always been drawn to Evie's healing magic. In the quiet moments when the others were preoccupied, Kaori would quietly watch Evie as she worked, her attention fixed on the gentle motions of Evie's hands as she mended wounds or calmed distressed energy. Slowly, Kaori began to ask questions, learning the basics of healing magic just by observing. She never said it outright, but Jing could see the spark of admiration in Kaori's eyes, and he knew she was determined to learn. The house worked because they both did, each in their own way. Jing walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, the warmth of the stove from breakfast still lingering in the air. He glanced around at the empty chairs and half-drunk glasses of juice. The energy they brought with them was still there, like a storm that had passed but left the scent of rain behind. It hadn't always been easy, but somehow, over time, this had become normal. After cleaning up from breakfast, Jing resumed his usual routine in the backyard. He moved through a series of stretches and energy exercises, letting the rhythm of his training take over. His movements were precise, calculated, each breath a steady flow of control. As he worked, he noticed from the corner of his eye that Viridia and Sora had quietly joined him on the porch, sitting together with their legs hanging over the edge. They didn't speak at first, just watched him. After a few moments, Jing caught them trying to mimic his movements, Viridia with surprising focus, and Sora stumbling through the motions, trying to keep up but clearly struggling. He didn't acknowledge them at first, continuing with his routine as though he hadn't noticed. But the sight of them trying to mirror his movements was hard to ignore. His lips twitched into a small smirk. It wasn't the first time they'd tried to copy him, but this time there was something different, an eagerness in their eyes. Kaori, meanwhile, was sitting off to the side, quietly watching. She didn't try to imitate him, but there was a calm smile on her face as she observed her siblings, her eyes glancing between them and the motions Jing was making. Jing finished his set and took a breath, glancing back at the porch. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The kids had started picking up on the idea of consistency, of working towards something, even if it was just copying his simple routine. Later on, a few days later, Jing passed the library and caught a glimpse of Valel inside. He had slipped into the room unnoticed, and when Jing peered through the door, he saw the boy with his head buried in one of Evie's many books on magic. Valel didn't notice Jing standing there, completely absorbed in his reading. Jing paused for a moment, observing the quiet boy who rarely drew attention to himself. His focus on the text in front of him was intense, and Jing couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet approval. It wasn't typical of Valel to show much outward interest in magic the way some of the others did, but his concentration spoke volumes. Jing didn't interrupt. Instead, he turned away, continuing on with his day. He knew the boy would find his own way, just like the others. They all had their own pace. Jing stood in the yard, moving through his daily training routine, his body flowing with practiced precision. His eyes, however, were not solely focused on his movements, but on the porch where Sora and Viridia were quietly watching him. He could see them sitting together, their legs hanging over the edge, both looking at him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Viridia was the first to stir, glancing at Sora, who seemed to be yawning and stretching, still half asleep. But there was something in the way they watched him, something more than just idle interest. Jing paused, letting his body settle into stillness. It was clear they were trying to mimic his movements, their attempts lacking the fluidity of someone with years of practice. Viridia's posture was awkward, her concentration fierce but unsure. Sora's movements were wild and uncoordinated, as though he were just going through the motions without truly understanding the purpose behind them. Jing smiled to himself. He hadn't expected them to catch on so quickly, but he knew it was time. He had to guide them properly if they were going to learn. With a soft exhale, he called out to them. "You two, come here for a moment." Viridia's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment at being caught trying to copy him. Sora, however, groaned, rolling his eyes. "Do we have to? I'm fine just watching," he grumbled. "Come on, Sora," Viridia said with a light-hearted nudge, her fiery spirit taking over. "It's not like we can get away with just watching forever." Sora huffed but reluctantly stood up, his feet dragging as he made his way over. Viridia followed, her face a mix of determination and curiosity. Jing turned to face them fully, his expression softer now, more patient than he usually allowed himself to show. "You're both doing well, but I think it's time we worked on getting the movements right." He motioned for them to stand in front of him, his tone warm but firm. "It's okay to start slow, I'll guide you." Viridia looked uncertain for a moment, but she nodded. Sora, on the other hand, crossed his arms, still looking like he might protest, but Jing could see the reluctant curiosity in his eyes. "Let's start with something simple," Jing said, his voice steady but encouraging. "Just your stance. It's all about balance first. If you don't have a solid foundation, the rest won't matter." Viridia immediately adjusted herself, her small frame focused and intent. Sora, however, shifted uneasily, as if unsure of what to do with his feet. Jing's gaze softened. He could tell Sora was struggling, both physically and emotionally, with the idea of being taught. He wasn't one to show weakness, and it made him uneasy to admit he didn't know how to do something, even in something as simple as a stance. "Take it slow, Sora," Jing said, his voice gentle now. "There's no rush. You won't get it perfect right away, and that's okay. Sora looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time. For a moment, he seemed uncertain, as if weighing whether or not to trust Jing's words. After a few seconds, he sighed and shifted his feet slightly, though still not quite right. Jing didn't correct him immediately. Instead, he gave a small smile, kneeling down so he was closer to their level. "That's good," he said softly. "You're already doing better than you think." Viridia, though, had already found her rhythm. She was focused, determined, and even though her movements were still stiff, they were more controlled. Jing gave her a nod of approval. "You're doing well, Viridia. Keep your arms a little wider, though, just a bit." She followed the advice immediately, a small smile tugging at her lips. It was a victory for her, small, but it mattered. Sora, who had been watching her, gave a disgruntled sigh. "I don't get how you're doing this so easily." "Because she's not rushing," Jing said, his voice calm and patient. "It's not about how fast you can do it. It's about getting the feel of it. Relax your body. You're trying too hard." Sora scowled but gave another frustrated sigh, slowly relaxing his posture. "This is dumb." "You'll get it," Jing assured him. "Just keep trying." A few days later, Evie walked through the library, her eyes scanning the shelves of magic books. She found Kaori sitting on the floor, her nose buried in one of the texts, her focus absolute. The little girl had always been so eager to help, but now her curiosity was turning into something deeper. Evie smiled to herself as she walked past, only to stop when she saw Valel sitting nearby, leaning over a different book with a quiet intensity. He hadn't been one to show an interest in magic, at least not openly. But here he was, completely absorbed in the study of energy manipulation. Evie paused for a moment, leaning against the doorframe, watching them both. Kaori was quietly reading aloud some of the instructions on healing spells, her voice soft and measured. Valel, on the other hand, was silently following along, his brow furrowed in concentration. Evie's heart softened. She knew the kids were all starting to find their own paths, and this moment, Valel reading with such focus, spoke volumes. He didn't talk much, but he was learning, just like the others. And Kaori, who had always been so observant, was beginning to realize her own connection to magic. With a quiet sigh, Evie stepped into the room. "I think it's time we had a little lesson," she said softly, drawing their attention. Kaori's eyes lit up, her excitement barely contained. Valel gave a small glance up but didn't say anything, his usual reserve still holding strong. Evie smiled at both of them. "Let's start with focusing and channeling your energy," she said. "We'll go step by step." Kaori eagerly nodded, her hands already gripping her book, while Valel, though still quiet, shifted slightly in his seat as if he were finally ready to take the next step. Evie's smile deepened as she began to explain. These two, like the others, would find their way. Together, they would learn, and in time, they would each discover the magic that lay inside them. Jing continued guiding Sora and Viridia through the basic techniques of energy control. He kept the exercises simple at first, centering their breathing, guiding energy flow through the hands, learning to push and pull it in sync with movement. Sora took to it faster than expected, despite his usual laziness. His grasp of energy came naturally, even if his attention span didn't. Viridia, on the other hand, was different. At first, Jing thought it was just nerves. She was focused, intensely so, and her movements were precise. But the moment she tried to channel energy through her hands, her body resisted. He could see the strain in her jaw, the tension in her fingers, the subtle tremble in her arms. The flow wouldn't stabilize. It flickered in and out, like a light fighting to stay on. He stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her back. "Try again," he said softly. She nodded, tried once more, and the energy pushed back harder. Her stance faltered, and she nearly fell forward. Sora moved to catch her, but she waved him off, frustrated. "I can do it," she muttered. Jing knelt beside her, studying her aura. It wasn't a matter of focus or willpower. The energy just wasn't syncing with her body. It tried to flow, but it didn't stay. Like a vessel unable to hold water, it leaked, destabilized, and scattered. You're trying harder than anyone else here, Jing said, his tone calm. But your body's not built to store energy like Sora's. That's not a failure. It's just something we have to work around. Viridia looked at him, eyes hard. Then what? I just sit and watch? No, Jing said. You fight a different way. She tilted her head, confused, and that's when Jing stood and stepped back. With a flick of his hand, he summoned a wooden practice sword from the rack under the porch and tossed it toward her. Try this, he said. She caught it awkwardly, blinking at him. A sword? You're fast. You're precise. You don't need energy to hit hard. You need technique. I'll teach you how to use this properly. You won't need to force energy into your attacks. You'll cut cleanly without it. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic revelation. But something changed in her expression. That stubborn fire, the one she always kept banked beneath her pride, flared to life. She gripped the sword tighter. All right, she said. Teach me. From there, things began to take shape. Every day, after breakfast, the backyard came alive with movement. Sora's energy control sharpened with time, his wild bursts of enthusiasm gradually giving way to more refined focus. He didn't always take it seriously, but he began to understand how to tap into his strengths. Kaori never trained in energy like her brothers, but quietly, steadily, Evie began to teach her the principles of mana, starting with gentle healing spells. Kaori watched, listened, and copied with a kind of grace that was all her own. Before long, she was tending to scraped knees and bruises from their more enthusiastic sparring sessions, proud of every success. Valel was the quietest in progress, but also the most consistent. He continued slipping into the library, poring over magical theory and mana disciplines. Evie eventually stopped pretending not to notice and offered him more advanced books. Soon she began teaching him directly too. Silent lessons conducted between cups of tea and stacks of notes, their voices barely above whispers. And Viridia, she took to the sword like she was born with it. Jing started her on forms and footwork, slow and repetitive. She hated it, at first, but with every correction, every inch of progress, her frustration transformed into fierce determination. By the time she turned 13, her strikes had power. By 14, her form was cleaner than most adults. She still couldn't hold energy like the others, but she didn't need to anymore. Her blade spoke for her. They all grew, not just in skill, but in understanding. Jing and Evie didn't have formal titles, but somehow the kids looked to them like teachers, like family. Over the years, training became routine. There were arguments, yes, setbacks, mistakes, stubborn outbursts, but there was laughter too. Shared meals, patched clothes, hugs at night, and sleepy voices whispering about dreams before bed. It became their life. And now, in the present, Jing stood once again in the yard, the memory of those early days quietly settling back into the corners of his mind. The sun had fully risen. The air carried the faintest scent of morning dew and toast from the kitchen. He stretched once, rolling his shoulders with a soft exhale. The kids were already halfway to school by now. Evie was gone too, off to wherever her work took her. The house was quiet, almost. A sudden flutter of wings broke the stillness. Jing looked up to see a small bird land on the porch railing, head cocked to the side. Its feathers were sleek and tinted with a strange shimmer, and in its talons, it clutched a tightly rolled scroll sealed with blue wax. Jing raised an eyebrow. "Already, huh?" he murmured. He reached out, and the bird dropped the scroll into his palm before flitting off into the sky. He turned the scroll in his hand, the familiar seal of the city's request bureau pressed into the wax. A job. It seemed things were about to get busy again. He smirked faintly and tucked the scroll into his belt. Guess the quiet never lasts long.